So thank you very much, Amélia, Rodrigo, for inviting us. It's a pleasure also for me to be back in this school where basically me and Francesca studied here during our education. I will try during this lecture to reflect upon a constant project we are doing in the office that is more to do with the methodology we are trying to apply in the studio, in our office, and this is something we are working on since a couple of years. Basically, Fondamenta, as said, it's not just me, it's also my partner, Francesca Gagliardi, and basically a team of young architects that they work with us since 5 years. We opened the office in end of 2016-17. It's important to say that we work in a context that is Italy, even though we educate ourselves in Switzerland and we work abroad before starting the practice. And then we decided to come back to Italy. And this is quite important for us to say because we really wanted to make architecture in Italy in a context that, if you look at the data, seems quite not reasonable in terms of number of architects that were produced or they graduate every year, number of institutions that we have in Italy, like 42 universities. I mean, we have the highest density in Europe for sure for number of architects. So being aware of the fact that was not maybe the easiest things to do is to open up a practice in Italy, we really wanted to come back to our country with the ultimate goal to build architecture. So for us, architecture is about the process of building and the idea of following the process from the beginning to the end, so also following the execution of those projects. Basically, our idea or goal is to think at architecture and architects in a more holistic way, recalling this famous idea of the Vitruvian architect being in the center of the process. So we really want to be in control, not of the project, but of the governance of the architecture. And what we are trying to develop in the office is to reset a series of rules, let's call it governance, through which we are able to work in Italy, to sort of govern the system, and at the same time to get in touch with layers and clusters that are normally not belonging to the architecture. So hidden layers like economical forces, environmental forces, so forces that normally as architects we deploy maybe too much to consultants or to other actors, and from which we suffer in a passive way. And we are now trying to sort of using all those clusters, all those hidden forces as a design process from the beginning. And we do that through use of technology in the sense that, I will explain it later through the project, we are trying to customize a series of technologies, starting from the so-called BIM, B-I-M, a sort of codes and lexicon, alphabet, in order to share and work with all the people working with us with the same sort of language. That is, to us, through our really short experience, the sort of nonsense of working in team or working with other consultants. So basically, when we start working in Italy, even though because me and Francesca came from a Swiss context, that is totally different, we start analyzing how a project or a process of doing architecture works. And basically, we start through some diagram about that. How does it work, this process? And on the left side, you see this idea of more than the idea, what we face in the first project of this inefficiency, where the architects is one of those lines being not on the center of the project and being totally attacked from different consultants, different layers. So a sort of guerrilla tactics where the project and the architect is in the middle of this battlefield. And after that, we try to think about implementing into the architecture a sort of policy-making tactics and talking about governance. So in Italy, we don't have really norms that are able to create a sort of standard or sets how a project should be really developed, how consultants should really work. So we try to think about the fact of making up a series of rules, a series of laws that we are now implementing into our through technology into this model, where we try to be at the center of the model, being in control of all these governance. So the two projects that we are really carrying on is the one of thinking about governance in architecture, and the second one is about thinking on a possible methodology that helps us in working in a context like Italy. So we frame a series of clusters that are related more to layers and forces that, as I said before, they are not normally belonging specifically to the architecture, like real estate, like norms, like environmental attitudes, that is not about talking sustainability, but understanding the context in a scientific way. And we use this series of cluster as a starting point of producing design. So we try to analyze those clusters and extract data out of that in order to put those into the design process from day zero, and not waiting for those things to arrive during the process along the project. I will try now to show you some recent projects focusing more on this cluster, just to try to make it more clear. And then I will end it up with two build projects that they were the things that they took us busy for a couple of years. So the first project I want to talk about, and is relating more with this cluster of economy, real estate, is a project, a competition we did in Milan. We didn't win, but we arrived second. And the main issue here was about the fact that as architects, and I mean, I underline all the time that we act and practice in Italy, so it's a really specific context. We sometimes refuse to, as architects, to deal with the topic of real estate, to deal with the topic of economy. And we think that this is a sort of nonsense strategy nowadays, because as architects we have to be aware of what economy means. Economy is as a series of rules that give form to our society, like it or not. That's the way economy works. It's a sort of reflection of a political system of any society. And in Italy, we don't have a lot of public competition. So the point of getting work is about getting private commissions or working with these contractors that, of course, they are not so interested in architectural terms on the project, but they just want to see sort of an economical revenues or an economical system out of that. So basically, we start thinking how to apply or how to relate to economical parameters in order to produce architecture somehow. And we were invited to this competition where basically on the left side you see the buildings that this company, these contractors already gave to us, already gave the form, the floor plan, but it was more giving us an Excel chart, just with numbers, revenues, and say, this is the building, this is the mass, this is what we want to earn out of that. And basically, our strategy was to try to look at the data in order to create a building that, in sort of a cynical way, was producing more revenues for the company. So we basically stress the building codes as much as possible, and we sort of analyzing according to the data that they gave us, that of course if you build in height, every floor is producing revenue, much more revenue for 5%. So we basically try to stress the fact of reducing the number of apartments in the bottom part of this. For us, it's a tower, even if it's 8 floors. And try to get out a sort of business plan for them that was more efficient. Let's say that they would have produced more revenue for them. And according to that, we sort of treat this building as an office building. So it was all thought about having, of course, a center core where there was installation, staircase and lift. Then all the structure was thought to be just on the perimeter, with this idea of having a prefab structure, so really easy to sort of, really fast, let's say, to build it, and put the installation on this fake ceiling, so moving all the installation just on the ceiling, not on the floor, producing possibility of different scenarios of floor plan, because as we saw yesterday, also from Ambra lecture, when you work with sort of contractors, the sort of things that does not make sense is that when you design a building, you design it more or less 2 or 3 years before it goes on the market. So the moment where you design it probably is not facing anymore the actual condition the market will face when the building is going to be built. So basically, we produce a series of floor plans saying that we don't believe in this idea of flexibility. I mean, architecture cannot be flexible somehow. So, of course, the idea is we build first the structure, so the sort of skeleton, and then during the process, we give you the instance that through this dimension, through this square meter, we can always apply a certain number of apartments in each floor. And this according to the market demand that you will have when you're going to start to sell the building that is not happening at day 0. And so this was the result, as said. So it's about 8 floor, 20, in between 20 and 27 apartments. That was the sort of ratio. And we are interested a lot on having an impact on the way people live in our architecture. I mean, we are interested at the end of producing spaces as architects. And all those constrictions that we create ourselves, they have to have an impact also on the way you perceive and live the space. So all these sort of inclination that are a result of the combination of regulation plus economical thought, then has to have an impact on the space. And for example, it creates this series of variation, even though the apartments are quite basic, where the structure and the form of the building has an impact on the apartments itself. The second topic I want to reflect with you is this environmental context. We love this documentary from Gottlieb Reggio called Cogliani Scazzi, where he basically for 10 years of his life went around the US with a camera, just making a picture of the different contexts you can face in the US landscape. And nowadays, as architects, as a also young practice, we had to take a sort of position regarding the fact of building. And starting by the fact that we believe that building is the less sustainable things you can do. I mean, that's for us is a sort of status quo. We want to reflect, rather than talking about sustainability, to talk about how to use energy. And it's more for us a sort of research on possibility to give form to energy, rather than think about installation on equipment that could make a building be more efficient or less efficient. And we do this through really basic thoughts, because we always think that nowadays we forgot about our history and the fact that there are buildings that they were built like 4,000 years ago, that they works much more better than nowadays machine building. So the sort of model that we have in the studio regarding the topic energy is thinking high-tech but building low-tech. So it's really about understanding what are the basics of what are the environments that exist nowadays. That if we reduce to the minimum is about understanding the condition of the sun, the temperature, the soil, the water. So really basic thoughts, and how we can translate those environments into space, into architecture. And we are now doing this project that is, let's call it an hotel, where is placed basically in the middle of nowhere. And the first things we started to do is accepting the fact that we build in a no-land context and we had to build, and we take this responsibility. How can we create a building such this, with this scale, and producing energy by its own? So it's placed in south of Italy, and the idea here was to produce through this huge roof a photovoltaic system. So we produce almost 650 kilowatt, even though the building needs 60% of this amount of energy. And we are studying a sort of system where we could inject the energy we produce in the villages around. Of course, these change country to country. Is about how the policy of energy, how can you sort of negotiate the production of energy, how to put it on the nets, on the infrastructure that exists. But the ultimate goal of this project is to try to give form to the building according to the energy we produce from which we give form. So we're going to use the water that we extract through well. We're going to use the sun, and we're going to use a sort of recycle of all this system. The building is a series of rooms that are just under this roof, this photovoltaic roof. Sometimes those rooms are underground, sometimes are on the ground, and other times are hanged on this structure. So basically, it's a basic conception of creating two systems that they are not intertwined. So basically, there is always a sort of gap of air in between the rooms and this shelter. Like normal construction, if you think about how they normally build in context where they are super hot. So creating a gap in between the building where you stay and the sort of a canopy. And this huge canopy gives also the possibility to walk through the structure, always outside, never inside. And is also moving through a different height according to the fact that we are studying how the air, the normal ventilation, could go through the building. So it's also the air and the circulation of these fluxes. It gives us criteria to understand how we take position, how we define criteria. The third project that sort of reflects upon these series of clusters is the one of the building codes. And of course, coming from a Swiss context, it's quite probably could seem like a nonsense, but you have to think about that in Italy, each city has its own laws. Each village has its own laws. So the most inefficient way to think about regulation, we have it. So it really changed place to place. So it's really a work to understand norms, not just as a series of rules that are framing our intervention, but more as a starting point to produce architecture. And this project that is now in construction, it's about this story. So we arrived, we were asked to make a renovation of the building that you see on the right. And this building was never finished from a legal point of view. So it was built in the 70s and then was never, let's say, put on the cataster. I don't know how to call it out of English, but was never, the legal process was never concluded. So in fact, this building is illegal. So you should tear it down. But there is these norms in Italy that they cannot allow you to tear down this kind of building. So in the context of Italy, we are plenty of those kind of structure from center of Italy to south of Italy. So the only things we were allowed to do was a renovation without changing the volume of this building. So we had to respect the volume and we had to make a renovation. By definition, in this specific context, a renovation is something where you can change everything apart from the structure. So you can tear it down walls, partial walls that are no structure. You can change things, but you cannot change the structure. So basically what we did is exactly the following. So it's a cynical speculative project where we basically tear down everything apart from the structure. So we liberate this domino system structure. And then we put inside this second steel structure, reusing the volume in a different way. And it's a house, and the idea was to free the ground floor and to use a series of rules through which we define the space of the house, creating a sort of dialogue with the existing structure. We couldn't change the level of the floor, so we had to respect exactly the height of the existing floor, so we were quite stuck with the idea of having not too much freedom in terms of height that we had to respect. And those are a series of rendering that talks about this idea of taking off the volume from the ground floor and moving the volume up. On the first floor, the house creates this dialogue in space with the existing structure, where the spaces are defined by the program, so from sleeping rooms to living rooms. And in order to control all those things all together, this is sort of a video that shows how we control those things with the people we work with, so through this technology, where they are not implementing things during the process, but we work together with this team where we share a sort of language, we share the sort of technology we use. So the building now is on construction, and these are a series of pictures that shows exactly the demolition. This is the existing structure where we took off the 3 centimeters of concrete just to be sure that the structure was working. And because the steel structure we put it in had to be supported by the existing structure. So we couldn't lay down the new structure on the floor. And then arrives all this series of light structure. The house is inside is really simple. It's plaster. And it creates a series of moments where it starts to dialogue with what was existing. Basically, in this context, that is south of Italy, building with this sort of technology is not too smart, because a light construction in terms of transmission of worm, it's not efficient. There is not enough mass. So what we did is we cover the building with this net in order to create a ventilated facade. So we deliberately decided to warm up the skin in order to make the building ventilated, just because we didn't have enough centimeter, enough dimension to create a proper mass. And the building will be finished, hopefully, in a couple of months. Then fourth episode, relating the cluster we taking into account, is the one of matter, where we are always interested in the studio to think about architecture as a research, as an open dialogue. So we try to test as much as possible the use of specific material according to structural condition. In this case, we were asked to make a retail, a 45 square meter retail shop, and it was the first time to us to think about architecture was also possible in this scale, for a jewelry designer, and that was able to have a super small spot on the ground floor of this nice building that they opened up recently in Milan. It's a fantastic new square that connects two of the most important points of the city, so it's an open public square. And what we did basically, we started to reflect on the idea of the designer and his sort of dreams on how she designed this jewelry, about the idea of deformation, about the idea of surrealism. She is able to produce this jewelry that it looks like super heavy, but they are made out of really thin paper material. She used leather, so she worked with this contradiction. In working with this organism, she called her jewelry body architecture. And we tried with her, so it was the sort of first time to make a project really together with the designer. So you are not starting from scratch. You are starting with the desire of designer that she wants to bring into a space her sort of thoughts. And our, let's say, trial was to work just with one surface, that is this elastic surface, that wrap up this 45, 46 square meter, and it trying also to delete the idea that when we have to show things into retails, there is always the space and always a device where you put, whether it's a cloth, whether it's a jewelry. So the idea here was to sort of, through the deformation of the surface, to being able to display the jewelry on the surface, on the space, deleting any sort of in-between elements. And so the space is this skin that move through the walls and the roof, and those three elements in the center that they are rotating so that you can move through the space, so it gives also the possibility to sort of create a way of defining the space. And it's something really different working in a retail project, because the time is super fast. So this project from day 0 to the end was lasting 5 months and a half, 6 months from first sketch to construction. And it also relates to topic where we were not used to think about, that is the artificial light. Of course, in buildings there is the artificial light, but in a retail, where you had to put the focus on the products, totally change the rules of the game. It's not more the space and the human being, it's more the space and the object that you want to highlight. So we started with this digital light model in order to understand how these tactics that we use about the deformation, so pressure and depression of the surface, could have an impact on the light. And we always work with digital a lot, but also with physical model. They are the one on the left side. So we were able to sort of control all these organisms by designing this skeleton out of wood that was produced off-site. And then always off-site, we divided this 45 square meter in pieces where we tested how this fabric was able to be stretched through the structure. It was really funny because it was always all produced off-site and then mounted in 7 days, basically, in the shop. The floor is out of rubber, so it's really soft. So the idea was not being able to put these surfaces also on the floor, to try to use also material according to the possibility of walking and living into a space. They change also the anatomy of the body. So as the space that should, we hope, will have an impact on the body is in an anatomical point of view. And those are the pictures from Mikael Olsson, a photographer and friends of us, that took the snapshot where you can see where the jewelry, they are always placed on the surfaces, sometimes they are laid down or hanged upon those elements. So basically those were the sort of intro relating more a recent project. And I just want to close with 2 buildings. The one is this winery that is basically the first building we built, a project that we started in 2016 and was then constructed and finished in 2020. And what was interesting about this project is its location. Is in Piemonte, Monforte d'Alba, in a UNESCO area. And building in an UNESCO area means that you have a lot of things and regulation that you have to take into account. So you are not free to decide a lot of things. So even though this project is one of the first projects we did as an office, so it's also there are part of things I discuss upon in the project that I show you were not there. I mean, that was one of the first things we did. We understood the potential of giving the form of the building just applying the regulation. So this roof that you see, this canopy roof was given. So they said that should have done this inclination, this height. The covering of the roof was given with this style. So in the square meter we were able to build on the ground floor were also given. So we didn't have so much to do in terms of the form of the building from outside. So we concentrate more on let's say, on the interior space. Interior intended as the DNA of a building, no? And we sort of applied a concept on how to put into this winery 3 different programs. That is the production that is happening on the underground and on the ground floor. The sort of, let's call it restaurant, hospitality, degustation that is the valet. And the red one, that are the rooms where you can sleep. And the idea was to not try to separate the program, but to mix it up, the 3 programs together, and define the position of the program just through structural tactics. So not using walls, but just using this big roof that was deputated to create this space. First things we did was also to, first of all, understanding from day 0 that making a winery there is no magic at all. It's a factory with a lot of really defined rules of how the space should be conceived, which is the temperature you should have for the production. So making a winery is like making a factory. If you make mistakes in dimension, height of the space, temperature, then the wine doesn't work. So it's really, the attitude is more the one of a factory industry and not of a poetic way of making the wine. And so the building is all about this roof and the fact that this roof conceive and produce the organization of the space. The main elements of this roof is these two structural beams that are also working for being lived inside as space. So this is the space where there are the rooms, the 3 rooms where you can sleep, and also defining the space underneath. It was done through this formwork that was suspended for the entire construction. It was quite an effort to build it, just because the entire structure was start to work just in the moment where we were pouring the roof. So we suspended the entire structure for 8 months, and the only moment where we were able to make the building works was this one, as soon as the roof was poured and all the elements were working in tension and compression. So as you see, on the underground is out of pillar, out of concrete, and then from the ground floor, as we call it, they start these pillars out of steel, through the fact that they were the better solution for the loads they were to take into these tension pillars, so they don't work in compression, but they work in tension. And this is the moment, there are always pictures from Michael Holson, where the organism declare its independency. So the building for us was conceived. After the moment, it arrives constantly, this idea of adding layers into the building, not trying to disguise the fact that there is a structure, there is a series of layers to make it work, this organism, but to sort of show off the fact that all the other layers, like windows, these pipes, that is a corridor, they were just attached, were an addition of elements that make the building works. And as you see, the space has not walls, but is divided by the form of the roof and the position of the glass. This is the finished building. We are here on the ground level, so the mid-level, that is also the entrance, where it happens 2 things at the same time at this level: the entrance of the people and the entrance of the wine. So the wines goes on this level, and for gravity goes down. And it arrives on the basement, where we have a really sort of rational building floor plan. It's divided in 4 areas that are the areas of the production. And going up again on the ground level, you see this vertical concrete shaft and this pipe that is a corridor that they bring you to the moment where you stay into the rooms. And those are the sort of compressed rooms where you can sleep. And from outside, we like a lot to declare also this style that we were forced to put it, but somehow we understand the fact that all the buildings that you have in the area, they are covered with these styles, but we declare the fact that it's a juxtaposition on this roof. And then I close with this project that is called Experimenta Il, and this is something different. It's also a territorial project. We are in Sicily, in between Noto and Avola, where we were asked from a client to find a land for making a house. The fact is that we ended up in finding a bigger area, so we were able to follow all the process. And we found out this abandoned area in this context that it was 21 hectares. And it started a really long process and project of finding other people interested in taking part into this project. And the project is about reusing these 21 hectares as an agriculture land, so to reproduce their lemon trees, olive trees, and to place inside the minimum amount of infrastructure, as we call, to make those things possible. And you have to think that the laws here in Sicily, on those square meters, it would have allowed you to build 20 houses, because the index, even though they change it, thanks God, says that for each hectare you could build almost 200 square meters of house. So a speculation project would have been, there was the other one on the table from another team, to divide all this, let's say, land in 20 plots and put a series of houses. So what we did was to find people interested in believing in the fact that like speculation in this sense would not have been the solution, but we should have done something back, not just saying you buy 21 hectares, you spend a lot of money to raise lemons. So we basically start with a research on defining the precise spots where we place those for infrastructure, where the idea was to relate to this specific really quite crazy context that we have in the area. On the second layer, we were interested in trying to work with local material and try to make a research on stone that, since the fact that this area, because of earthquake, it's a SISMA 1 area, that means that it's really difficult to build. Since 30 years, 40 years, they use stone just as a finishing, not anymore as a structural material. So we started from the beginning to understand what were the possibilities with the stone. So we had two possible stone. The one on the left is called Modica stone, and you find it not through excavation, but you find it by digging into the land. This is like a kind of granite stone, so like more performance than a concrete wall. The one on the right side is called an Otto stone, and is the one that were used during the Baroque to build everything. And it's really fragile, so if you use it structurally, you have to use big format. So we started at the beginning this research, just saying, understanding where was this stone, how much was costed, how could we reuse it in terms of technology. And then, of course, we put together the third layer that was understanding the context in terms of history. And the Sicilian Baroque is a really specific Baroque that has nothing to do with the Baroque that we know more as architects, like, for example, the Roman Baroque from Borromini. But it's a Baroque that manifests itself in the open space, that manifests itself not into the buildings, but in the public space. So Noto was totally reconstructed in 1693 after an earthquake, and it's a sort of ideal Baroque city, because what you see in red, what was the idea of the architect? They just positioned, first of all, this sort of grid, but then he put also public buildings and churches at the end of each axis, creating a sort of space in between the building, that are the gray one, that were then developed through times. And there is this fantastic research done by Paul Hofer. There was also a professor at ETH and the founder of the GTA, that spent his life, like 20 years of his life, in doing this survey of the Baroque principles, so we really dig into. To make the long story short, we started to sort of making those infrastructure. And the first things we did is we tried to make those work as one entity in terms of energy. So similar to the hotel, all those buildings works with the same water well, and they try to be efficient in the fact that they use the energy through just solar panel. And this was for us really important, to sort of find a sort of economy of means in doing four things into this landscape. We call it infrastructure just because we deliberately decide to let those buildings not belonging to the world of the house, but to the world of the infrastructure. Touching and designing into this landscape is anyway a brutal act. And we believe that understanding those houses not as normal Mediterranean houses, if we think about Rudowski references that were shown yesterday, but more as a new sort of way of living the outside cover space could have been a sort of solution, or at least this is what we were comfortable to think about. So you see the 4 infrastructure, 3 of them are built. The one in the middle is not, it won't be. And I just go through this series of pictures that are from a couple of weeks ago. So this is the first one. And it's an infrastructure that works with the idea of, like, this is something that is going through all these houses, to compress as much as possible the moments where you live into the space. So compress the closed space of the house and expand through the dialogue with the landscape, the outside space. So you have the rooms on the right side, the living is on the left, that is divided in 3 parts. And then you have this tank, this pool, that is used as a tank for recycling the water. But of course, you can also make a swim. So this, the main structural point or issue on the construction was about this element out of stone, this modica stone, where we build up walls according to finding those pieces, understand which was the structural potential out of that, and using to support and divide the space. So this is basically the wall where on top sustain the slab and this tank. This tank that was done out of steel, offside, I put it inside. And the house basically try to change the sort of way in which you should live into this ecosystem. That is more about compressing the space that are inside. All the roof, they are designed through the fact that the sun should never touch the glass. The sun should never enter the space. And you enter them from the living room into this sort of tunnel that is 25 meters long, that it brings you to the rooms that are excavated on the landscape. And this is the tank. Of course, all these pictures, they don't show how the landscape will reconquer the space. That is the idea of those houses, leaving this infrastructure into landscape. The second is about an infrastructure that works just on one level. And let's say that we define this moment of the hill that is more placed on the top. And we compress all the spaces that were closed spaces through a series of walls out of stone, trying to define what was the minimum space to be lived inside, and building almost double the space. So all those houses, they are bigger on the outside covered space than inside, through these series of shells that define how the light should get in and how you should protect yourself with shadows. It's, let's say, basic in terms of construction. So the company, Sicilian company, they use proper old school tactics to make, for example, the formwork and to build it. It was amazing to build up the process with them. So this project at the end was 5 years, so it was really long process, in order to arrive to the definition of this exterior covered space. Also here the tank is placed on a beam. As I said, this is the series of walls out of stones that in this case they are not structural, but they define exactly how it's possible to live, where we always compress the space they bring you through the rooms. At this fact that the inclination of the interior space follow another logic, it creates much more sort of idea of having this roof flying over sort of your roof. And then the third one is basically the smaller one, but it's sort of decline the same principles into this series of infrastructure. And even in this case, the infrastructure is formed by the simple idea to have an area that is the sleeping room that is facing east, northeast, and the sort of living room facing north, through a series of beams that define exactly the moment of how to hang these two different roofs. In this case, we tested with this Norton stone the possibility of building also structural walls. So it's a series of stone that are tied together with these dowels. So if there is a sort of earthquake, they were able to move. We hope so. And this basically it's the house at the moment, where always the ratio between the inside and outside is almost at the time equal. Even in this case, you move through a compressed corridor in order to arrive to the views. And I close with the one that was not built. And of course, it was the one where we put the most effort, as always. And it's about an infrastructure that reacts to an existing water tank in this case. So the water tank was given. And this house reflects about the possibility of the idea of reusing a sort of morphology and making up through the three-dimensional axis of this morphology the creation of space according to the program that was given. And yes, and the idea here was to build everything basically out of stone wall, so 90% of the wall, and through the ideas of deforming or metamorphosis of the space, the wall became beams, the beams became floor, just using obsessively the same sort of logic. The house in this case was 80% underground, and it get lights through courtyards. And even in this case, the project stopped the first day of the construction building. So it was killed at day one of the construction process. So we were able to arrive till the end somehow through the control of all the parameters that we sort of making up in the office. So for example, just to make an example, we were able to control also the construction of all the wall. We always go through model to real model to digital model. It's a mock-up one-to-one that we did in the office. And we always close this project by this module. That is the module that was done through the concept. So we started through the concept with the possibility how to build it, and to then sort of try out a discourse out of that. Yes, this is the building. I just close with 2 slides. This is more related to the things we are doing with the students here. Talking about how we tried last year to bring this idea of this methodology, this economy of the project in the university. There was a course 2 semesters at the ETH, where we basically try with students to implement this idea of having a methodology and apply to the project. So how to extrapolate data from a context that was Switzerland. So basically we define an economical context as Switzerland. We then went through a selection of plot through companies, and we work with the students just with economical parameter. So no program, no user, nothing. Extrapolate the economical parameter the company wants to achieve on those areas, and out of that sort of create your own building, your own program. The first semester was done on free plot, and the second semester was done with building took off real market but existing building. And then we make up with a sort of, we call it manual, that is about this methodology, as you see the chapter, where we gave a sort of toolbox of how to relate to this cluster, how to read economical data, how to extrapolate environmental parameters. So it was a sort of toolbox that we were able to extract from the Swiss context. If we would have done something like that in Italy, it would have taken probably 10 years. And we were able to do it because all those data in Swiss are open sources, most of them. So it was crazily nice how you can get data and information according to different clusters. And the idea with the students was to then give form to strategy, always deciding which of those parameters could have made sense in terms of economy and twisting the paradigm. And so these are examples, for example, from students where they work a lot on those drawing on legislating, let's say, and mixing together economical parameters and the idea of having a strategy that has an impact on space. And we implement then this idea of this technology called cinema graph, where the ultimate idea was to represent space in movement, but not the movement of the body, the movement of all the layers you normally are difficult to give a form. And I mean, it was a nice trial, let's say. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Federico. Does anyone have questions?
So thank you for your presentation. You started talking about the Italian context. My question is specifically about Milan. So in Milan every year there are at least 6,000 architects more, and this explains a lot on how it's difficult for young architects to emerge. And I would like to ask you, in your case, what did you find most difficult working in such a difficult context? And secondly, what was the approach that made really possible for you and Fondamenta to emerge?
Let's say that what I still think about Italy is that it's a country that has huge potential and possibility for architects. The problem, let's say the problem, is not a problem. The question is more that possibility is plenty. There is also a sort of a void where there is the need to build, there is the need to do a sort of kind of building architecture. The problem is more about the system, so it's really difficult also in economical terms to make survive an office. But I really encourage all Italian, let's say, architects also studying abroad to at least try to come back and be active in Italy. Because if you see those data of architects, the point is that from those data, the active architects becomes now 20% of all those people that are graduating in architecture. And this number is going down. So we graduate a lot of architects, but then at the end, from those architects, the one that then become architects as a profession is decreasing a lot. And it's a context that needs a lot the idea of having a sort of professional attitude in the idea of making architecture, no? And the most difficult things was basically this one. The most difficult things was at the beginning for 2 years we were just trying to find projects and trying to find someone believing on us, because basically you cannot count on public competition as it could be, for example, in Switzerland, even though in Switzerland it's not so easy now in terms of numbers. But there you cannot count on the public. I mean, that's for sure. We do every year 2 public competition. in Italy, and we do it as an exercise just because we want to work with different scale, because we work mainly on private things or small scale things or housing. And let's say that during these 2 difficult years at the beginning, we understood that most of the potential clients or people we were talking with, they were not interested at all about architecture, but they were interested in talking in another way about architecture. And that's why we implement this idea also talking about in economical terms. So we tried at least to switch the paradigm to which we confront ourselves with clients or with this contractor. We try to talk through their language, through their meaning. Because at the end, they're not interested in what kind of building, what kind of architecture you do. They are more interested in that you get their sort of, I don't know how to say, it's not about trust, it's about maybe they give you a job. If they understand, you are able also to understand their world and how their world works. So that was the most difficult things, that we switched totally the way of working, we moved to this technology, we entered in this idea of the economy of the project, not just because we wanted, but just because we saw it as the only possibility to try to face the Italian context, to try to change the attitude, not position ourselves as the architect that arrived as ideas, but as an architect that he tried to understand the context and work through those layers as design principle. So that was, I think, the things that they make us possible now to survive. It just was this twist and introducing from day zero layers or forces that normally you don't count from day zero, or you don't talk about Excel sheets to explain a concept. This is what we do basically. In order to have freedom after that in producing the architecture we are interested in. Yes. See.
Thanks, Federico, for this incredible presentation. It was really inspiring. Starting from the last sentence you just mentioned, like the term freedom, I'm really interested in the method, the process you apply to the project, to the design. Meaning it seems to me that there is a huge amount of discipline and control, and then also a certain degree of freedom at the end. And I would like you to, if you could address further this topic and this relation of control and discipline and freedom, both like in the process of analysis and in the design process.
Yes, basically, let's say the first part of each project is about collecting this idea of collecting data and give form to data without having any sort of architectural intention in giving a form to this data. It's basically, it's more an analysis work of understanding from which cluster how we could project those cluster in form in space, and then starting combining together what is possible, what was already as a form, belonging to these hidden layers, so hidden forces. And of course, our ultimate goal then is to produce architecture that also follow our dreams, our research, our idea also of contradiction. But this comes through the process, basically. So each project is started really in a pragmatic way, I would say. So giving form to those data and giving form as an exercise to all these constraints. Giving form to these constraints allows you to already have a space, give a space to the constraint, no? To translate economy in form, energy in form, to give a space to give a form and a space to those data. And then it's a continuous process. I mean, there is not any sort of magic trick. It's just like continuously working over and over this process. And the other important things that from day zero, the people that decided to work with us and using this language, this technology, you work with us from day zero. So that means that at the first day of the research, all the people are on the table. And somehow this helps to sort of create a more precise trajectory from day zero rather than implement it over time. Of course, we took a lot to create, I mean, it's still on working, this system or this sort of infrastructure, but we see that, I mean, it could have a potential. I mean, at least it enable us to work and to build. So from now, we keep going on.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the spectacular presentation. And I'm interested about your point of view. What do you think? That is really subjective, I know. But how is your point of view? It's going to change the artificial intelligence in the way we are projecting architecture. And we don't know, but we have each one a point of view how to handle this.
Yeah, basically this idea of artificial intelligence, that is the one that we are testing during this day, it's more like an exercise. I mean, we don't have any idea what will be the consequences of these things applied to the world of architecture, but it's something, I mean, we are really curious overall about understanding what technology could give to the world of architecture. I mean, was something that in history was always like that, no? I mean, the implementation of technology in the construction process, I mean, if you think about your Hudson building, I mean, there is certain moment in history where technology helps architects in order to give form to their idea, to give form to building. So to us, is without having any sort of prejudice, looking at technology is just trying to apply what we find and understand what could be the outcome. Always with clear in mind that it's technology that we control and not vice versa. So we, for example, are not interested in any parametric design where the design comes out of scripting. That's something that, I mean, we are not into these things. I mean, we respect a lot who does this, but it's not our cup of tea. But we believe that, for example, the implementation of those things we are using those days into a data analysis, into application of giving form to possibility, or like in terms of set of rules, in terms of potential of variation, could have a sort of, or could be implemented into a process. Of course, through a methodology. I mean, it's not about using artificial intelligence to make buildings, but maybe you can use this infrastructure in order to fasten up the process of collecting data, for example, to give form to data. So to us is just out of curiosity, honestly, to try to see if there is a sort of possibility to intertwine this world with the one of architecture. But nothing more than this at the moment.
I mean, do you think it could take a principal role in the future? Is your point of view, or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it works as a neurologic information, so that means that it's really interesting how they're going to be controlled. Here again comes the topic of the governance, the policy making. But honestly, yes, I mean, I think it will have for sure an impact on producing architecture. Then, of course, it's up to us how we want to control this or create a policy out of that. But yes, I think it's sort of a process of evolution to not look at too skeptical, but with curiosity.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I would like to ask something about what you said about the house and actually the buildings being controlled by the market. You actually design the buildings in relations to the market. And until now, actually, the houses and the buildings that we build were not, were not so closely connected to the market. So actually, they were not another product from an industry. And how do you see any danger in connecting actually the built environment to a market? And actually, when the market, we say, changes rapidly in the next 20 years, then the building that we use and that are connected and grow out of the market will be useless then in 20. Or like, how do we make the buildings that come out of the market last longer than a car or a washing machine or a fridge?
I don't have an answer, but I mean, it's a nice point to reflect upon, exactly this one. So we don't have an answer. What we starting to do, according to the fact that working in the Milanese context is all about this, is exactly what you are saying. The question we ask ourselves is, how can we do as architects? So as architects, having an impact on those buildings and try to understand, reflect upon the relation that market and architecture could reflect, could have on space. I don't have an answer. And of course, one could also take opposite direction and say, I mean, we don't have to follow the market, building will last forever, or at least, let's say, 100 years. So for us, it was more, let's say, a trial to see if there is a possibility of using market as a design strategy. But honestly, we did this competition more as a, let's say, a provocation of saying, okay, we never thought like that. What is going to happen if we follow the market instead of being resilient and say it exists, a market we want to have, even because I'm not sure about that. I mean, what kind of market we will have in 20 years? I don't know. What kind of society? I mean, as architect, we should envision or have a vision, but that was a specific sort of point on trying to connect the two. And honestly, of course, if you say, okay, you follow the market, then in 20 years the market changed completely its laws and rules, what do we do with this building? No idea. Maybe we had to tear it down and a building from new. I don't know. I mean, it was just, let's say, it was a reflection more simple on the fact that when you work with those constructor or company, the process is really long of architecture, and when you design the building, is basically always 2, 3, 4 years before the building is live. So that was just a reflection on understanding if there is a possibility in switching sort of paradigms, in understanding, maybe changing the phases, maybe changing the logic of how you project the building into time. But I mean, it's a fantastic question, and I mean, something we should reflect upon. I mean, I don't have an answer, just trials.
Thank you for the lecture, very inspiring. I wanted to ask you something that you just mentioned about that you don't believe in the office, in the flexibility of a building. So you think that it's defined forever, the function of the building, or what did you mean by not believing in the flexibility?
No, let's say I don't believe in flexibility in the sense that as soon as you build a building, as soon as you want to change it, it brings together a series of consequences that have an impact on the building itself. They have an impact on the mechanical system, in the infrastructure, in the structure. So let's say it was more maybe a statement about a provocation. I mean, believing in the fact that the building could easily change, we don't believe in this. We believe more in understanding buildings that could, through times, have a second life. But anyway, this is about thinking on a metamorphosis. I mean, it's not that the building changed like this. So that was more a sort of awareness of understanding. When we design, we project a possible future into buildings, into spaces. And we really try to think what is the maximum lifespan we can embrace into a building. If I think about those houses in Sicily, it was about trying to freeze the time there. Freeze the time according to the fact that we believe that in this context, the possibility of living outside cover space will last probably forever. So it's not that we don't believe in flexibility, it's about understanding what does it mean when it comes to real life. What could be a strategy, what could be a sort of way of thinking. And I mean, we are sort of skeptical with the idea of thinking, building as machine, like changing machine, technological machine. We are more into thinking, building as organism, and that means that we should try to think to reduce as much as possible the technological part that are inside the building. I mean, this is what we are trying to apply now, by using a lot of technology at the beginning to think about. But to sort of step back a little bit from this idea of thinking, building as machines. I don't know if it's clear, but...
Hello. Thank you for the presentation. I found all the drawings to be very well aligned with what you were saying, so thank you. I just wanted to ask about the topic of accessibility of a lot of the digital programs like Twinmotion that we've been using. And whether you think this will make architecture a very saturated profession where we have a lot of maybe lower skill architects instead of a few very highly skilled architects, or whether that's a good thing.
Let's say, starting from the point that we believe that there is multiple approaches to the discipline, and there is not one that is right or one that is wrong. What we are researching, let's say, is to see technology as a tool, just as a tool, as could be like drawing on paper. And to us, the implementation of technology, the main reason why we switched to that was not for representation, was not for basically aesthetical things, was more about implementing the idea of governance, so policy making through technology, so how to control the process. And secondly, to use tools that could reveal us as architects other layers, to give form to other layers and not necessarily is the space itself that you could reveal with a nice model. We do model, we sketch. I mean, it's not that we have any sort of dogmatic approach to technology. We see just as a potential to reveal other layers and to give form to layers that normally are difficult to represent in other ways. But that's all, is just another tool, and it's just about having, as an architect, multiple arms to use on our case to design. No, of course, the presentation wanted to use some projects to extrapolate those approaches. Of course, in any of the projects we are trying to do, those overlaps, as you are saying. I mean, this is really part of the game. So the intention of this presentation was to try to divide, even though the idea is to combine, in order to help me and us to explain a little bit better what we intend for each cluster. But of course, as you are saying, those things, when we tackle project or research, they comes all on once, of course. And of course, the project comes out of those clashes and contradiction of all these things, of course. I mean, mine was just a trial to explain what we intended for each specific field and used aspect of the project. But of course, we intended as one thing, okay, as one sort of series of rules or methods that we apply all together. Let's say that is something that we are building on time. So there are projects that, for example, the last that I showed, that started 4 years ago. I mean, it's a process. I mean, we are learning from ourselves. We are making mistakes, failing, and keep going on. So it's always difficult when you do a lecture to try to put a sort of mask over it and say, that's the way we do things. I mean, it's a fail and try process, always. And I would say that, let's say, now we are more conscious, aware of this process. So in the project we are doing now, we are always trying to push much more. If I think about the winery, most of the things I said, they were maybe up in the air, but were not down on the ground. But I mean, this is the nice thing of this work is, I mean, it's a process. You keep going on and you make mistakes, and you learn a lot from mistakes, much more than from other things. So. Thank you.